You're listening to the Today's Eden podcast, episode 22. This is where the struggles are real, the callings are heavy, the kids are sticky. We come together because it takes a village, and this is your tribe. Hey guys, thanks for listening to the Today's Eden podcast. Today on the show I have Mark Lukacs, and he is a history teacher and freelance writer in the San Francisco Bay Area, and his work has been published in the New York Times, the Atlantic, Pacific Standard, Wired, and also he did a extremely moving TED Talk about him and his wife, which is what we're going to talk about in this podcast. But seriously, the TED Talk, you will bawl your eyes out. It is so good and it is so inspiring. So Mark wrote about his wife, Giulia, and their marriage and how it was redefined by mental illness and how basically love kind of triumphed all. You guys, Giulia's story really resonated with me in that most of us struggle with some form of anxiety or perfectionism or living up to others' expectations or the expectations that we feel that we need to meet, whether it's in a new job that we get, after having a baby, holding up to our husband's expectations or what we think they are, trying to be the perfect everything, trying to be the best at everything. And when you become a mom, a wife, and also an employee, you have this pull in all different directions to be the best, to be 100% at all of it. And it can be so overwhelming. And this theme was really recognizable to me throughout their book. His book is called My Lovely Wife in the Psych Ward, and I am so honored to have him on the show. I'm so grateful for Giulia sharing her story. Let's get to the episode with Mark Lukacs. Hey, Mark, thank you so much for joining me on the Today's Eden podcast. I'm happy to have you on to talk about you and your wife's story. I would love it if you could introduce yourself and tell the listeners, who you are, kind of some info, what your family is like, all the good stuff.
Sure thing. Hi, Ashley. Thanks so much for having me on. It's really nice to talk. So my name is Mark Lukacs. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area with my wife, Giulia, and our son, Jonas, who's 5. I'm a history teacher. I've been teaching history for about 10 years. And Giulia works in online marketing. And about, I guess at this point, it's 7 years ago when we were in our 3rd year of marriage, Giulia suffered an unexpected psychotic break and was hospitalized. And that set off the first of 3 hospitalizations over 5 years. And through that process, we decided that I was going to write a book about it. And so now I have a new book out. It's called My Lovely Wife in the Psych Ward. And it's really about how we as a family have tried to navigate and stay together and stay in love through this really challenging mental health diagnosis.
How did you and Giulia meet?
We met literally the first week of college. I had kind of already heard about her. She's from Italy, and there were some rumors going around about this beautiful Italian girl, and I was like, "Oh, beautiful Italian girl." And then when I met her, honestly, I was really intimidated and thought that I would probably just kind of have a crush on her from afar and never have the courage to talk to her. But then a few weeks later, we were at a party, and we ended up talking off to the side and ended up spending the rest of the night talking to each other, just going from place to place and really enjoying hanging out, and clearly wanted to spend the rest, we just wanted to get to know each other better. And I walked her to her dorm room and gave her a kiss, and she kissed me back. And honestly, that was kind of it. At that point I was like, yep, I like this girl a lot. And, within a few months we already sort of had the idea of a future that involved each other. And we were 18-year-old, right? We were like, but we were totally in love, and it felt awesome. And we just kind of went with it.
Yeah. So prior to, her first sort of episode, was there any signs that do you have any signs, or is this something that just comes on and it just comes on full force?
Yeah, it's tough to say, right? So her diagnosis is currently bipolar disorder, and most bipolar disorder, there are some indications of mood swings throughout adolescence and your 20s,
Mm-hmm.
but it might not have a first really severe episode until your mid to late 20s. That's some typical progression. Julia is super ambitious. She's really, as long as I've known her, she's been really successful. I mean, she had a near perfect GPA in college
Wow.
and had these like awesome internships over the summer at these like different ad agencies and got like a great job out of college. And so she was a little bit of a perfectionist for sure, and she could be hard on herself and sometimes experience some anxiety.
Yeah.
But honestly, like I'm a high school teacher. I work with a lot of teens, and her anxiety was nowhere out of the range of typical, like
Yeah.
it was just like someone who pushes themselves hard, and that's kind of it. And so, in fact, when she was psychotic, the first thing the doctors ask is like, well, have you seen any warning signs? And does it run in her family?
Mm.
And the answer to both of those was no. And so that's actually why it was really hard for them to try to pin down what exactly the diagnosis is or was. They actually changed up her diagnosis a few times with the first episode. And it wasn't until her second episode, which was 3 years after the first one, that they said, oh, yeah, now that it's back, we're pretty confident in calling this bipolar.
Was it a surprise to you when it came back?
Yeah, it was a very unwelcome surprise, to be honest. So like the first one was like really disruptive to our lives, like let me just give you a sense of what it was like.
Yeah.
She was hospitalized for 23 days and she was kind of vacillated. Sometimes she was really agitated and like her mind racing and couldn't sit still. Other times she was like borderline catatonic. She was definitely experiencing some hallucinations and delusions. And then when she came home from the hospital, the psychosis was under control, but that was replaced with a really deep depression. And so I stayed at home with her because, to be honest with you, she wasn't actually really safe to be home alone.
Right.
So she needed someone to be with her. And that lasted for 9 months. So this was like almost a year. And in that year, it was really, really brutal for sure. But the diagnosis they had at the end of that was major depression with psychotic features. And the basic hope was like, you know what? This is probably a one-time thing. It's kind of like the equivalent of what we used to call a nervous breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of rode that diagnosis. And in fact, it was after her first episode, about 2 years after her first episode, she got pregnant because we really wanted to be parents. And we did this with the consultation of her doctors, and they all thought it was safe, and we were really being cautious about it. And she had an amazing pregnancy, and then she loved being a mom, but it was when she returned to work that she had her second episode. And a friend of ours said that like the first episode is hard, but it's actually the second episode that's the hardest, because it's where you have to really accept that this is not going away, that this is like forever part of who you are, and that it's not like a broken arm where you break it once and then it fixed, and it's not like you have to worry about breaking your arm again, right?
Right.
But this is the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, it can come back, and so you really have to. I mean, that's like a whole mindset shift. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just to have to embrace like a lifelong diagnosis. The idea for Giulia, the idea for her of taking medicine for the rest of her life, that was something she really was not psyched about. That took her a long time to embrace.
Yeah.
And just this idea that like, yeah, this could kind of come back at any point,
Right. So then how, like for you though, and I think you've talked about this, like I've listened to other podcast episodes with you guys, and I feel like for you, like there is, of course, like no matter what for Giulia, there's like this unknown, but there's somebody sort of there to talk to, and like physicians and doctors and stuff who are kind of like guiding you. But as like her spouse, like, and you're her husband, and you went from this role of being her husband to now like like you're also slash like caregiver slash like trying to keep things cool, and like how did that change like you personally, and then like the dynamic of you guys as a couple?
Yeah, that's really like the hardest part is that shift in roles, right?
Right.
So like first off, when something bad happens, you turn to your partner, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just the natural thing. This is the person you chose to spend the rest of your life with. They're like your greatest confidant, and that's who you go to.
Right.
And I think even if it was a physical illness, of course I still would have been able to like talk to Julia about it. But because it was a mental illness, I couldn't really um, ask Julia. Like I couldn't consult her
Mm.
for what was going on because she was so consumed by it. So on the one hand, I was feeling this like intense loneliness, you know? But then on the other, this idea of becoming a caregiver. I mean, like Julia and she was the hardworking, ambitious college kid. I was the dude who like literally skateboarded around campus or like, dingy clothes from the Goodwill. And, like I was like hey, whatever, we'll figure it out. And Julia was like, no, let's have a plan. Let's figure out all the logistics. And I had to all of a sudden become the logistics guy, where I had to manage all the communication with the doctors and with her job and with her parents who were like obviously eager for any sort of update, and my parents who had the same questions.
Mm-hmm.
And also just to be constantly worried, like, are things getting better? Are we doing the right things? Is this the right thing for Julia or the wrong thing for Julia? And there's this one anecdote in the book where after Julia came out of her first episode, a friend texted her and was like, hey, I've got an extra ticket to go to a concert tonight. Do you want to come? And like, I didn't even really let Julia finish the sentence before I told her, like, you can't. This is a terrible idea. Like, you'd have to drive yourself. You don't know where you're going. Your medicine puts you to sleep early. This is not smart. It's not safe. And she's like, what are you talking about? I just want to go to a concert with my friend, And so, unfortunately, I think that the caregiving definitely threw a major wrench in our dynamic as a husband and wife because a little bit out of necessity, but also a little bit out of protectiveness, I pretty much managed Julia's life while she was ill, like I planned her days and I got her to the places where she needed to be. And I like literally watched her take her medication because she didn't want to take it. And then all of a sudden we had to go back to like normal equality, which is really hard to just like turn that switch off and let it go, especially since I, as the caregiver, had this fear that if something went wrong again, it was going to be up to me to clean up the mess,
Yeah.
Not that it, of course, it's like incredibly difficult for Julia when she's in her psychotic states, but like, it's so hard to be the caregiver in that role too, like there's just so much to juggle. So when she finally did start to get better and get out of her depression, she just wanted to go back to the relationship as it always had been. And for me, that was really hard because it had been such an extended period of time where I was always on such high alert that I couldn't really put my guard down,
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't just like trust the process, instead I'm more like micromanaging everything. And to be honest with you, I was doing it because I felt like if things go poorly, it's in many ways going to be my mess to have to clean up. Mm-hmm. So that's actually really what the heart of the book is about, is how this mental health diagnosis puts such a strain on us because it kind of redefined the way that we, operated together, and that we had to figure it out. We had to adjust and adapt in order to make this relationship still work.
Yeah, not only that, but just like you said, her first hospitalization was 9 months.
Well,
right?
She was hospitalized for a month, and then she was in
Okay.
an outpatient program for 9 months. So the whole, like between days of when Julia was kind of the Julia I had always known, and then that Julia returning, that was about a 10-month period.
That's
Yeah.
that would be so hard. So how do you, okay, so I have so many questions.
Sure.
But first, for those who don't know, I want to kind of let you define what bipolar is and what psychosis is.
Sure. Those are great questions. So bipolar disorder is a mood disorder where someone kind of goes between extremes of mood. Those two are typically called mania and depression. Mania, for most people, is really fun. You kind of feel like you're on top of the world and you spend a lot of money and are really creative and go out party. And then when the mania flips into the depression, you have a hard time getting out of bed. You might feel suicidal, feel like you're not worth it. Giulia's mania is not fun. Her experience of mania is instead, she goes right into psychosis. Psychosis is a state where patients are generally really rapid thinking, where you kind of can't stop the train of thought going. Paranoid thinking, this kind of the sense of like people are out to get you. There was definitely a lot of that with Giulia. Psychosis can also be associated with hallucinations, whether they're auditory or visual. And Giulia was definitely hearing voices, feeling like she was having conversations with people. And so that, in some ways, actually, the fact that Giulia is bipolar, that both aspects of it are really unpleasant. The psychosis is generally pretty scary, and the depression is, really sucks. I mean, to be honest, that actually has made it easier for her to acknowledge that she has to address it, because what a lot of patients with bipolar go through is the mania feels great and they end up missing it. The depression's no fun. But the in-between of like not depression, not mania, you start to kind of miss that mania. And so unfortunately, a lot of people with bipolar end up playing their own doctors and kind of taking themselves on and off their medications as they think is needed. And that's why bipolar can be a really difficult diagnosis for some, just because of that like temptation almost to experience some of that high of mania,
Yeah, and you guys were super young. Like I remember reading that you guys were like 27.
Yeah, we were 27 when she had her first episode, and she was 30 during the second and 32 during the third.
So how was that like first hospitalization for you guys? I mean, I'm assuming like for her, it was probably a totally different experience than it was for you.
It was, because I could only go see her for an hour and a half a day, right?
Oh my gosh.
And so she was in there with me not having any access to her for most of the day by herself. And like when I dropped her off, I was kind of panicking because I was really I was just really scared. I really hadn't seen what mental illness looks like up close.
Yeah.
It's scary to see people behaving in disorganized thinking and altered states. If you haven't seen it a lot, it's definitely terrifying. And so this idea of leaving Giulia in a hospital with people I didn't know and didn't trust, and barely getting to see her, was really, it freaked me out, I remember I was like, I thought the hospital was the right place for her, but then when I saw it, I like panicked, So for her, the first hospital for her was really, I mean, she calls it hell. Like she says it was her version of hell. It was just really, really unpleasant and difficult. For me, it was just so much worry and so much uncertainty. Like I didn't know how long she was going to be in there. I didn't know what she was going to be like when she came home. I didn't even know how she was going to be when I visited her. Like each visit was totally just this unexpected. I just show up and boom, be in her world.
Yeah.
And I have to like be there and kind of pretend that it wasn't scary or sad, so that I didn't get her more worked up, And so honestly, that first hospitalization was just like, it was terrible. I don't think there's any other way to put it than just how terrible and tough it was for both of us. But I think you're totally right too, in completely different ways,
how do you support like your relation, like at this point is like your relationship not even kind of
Yeah.
like the priority because you're only seeing her for like an hour a day? I would like that would
Yeah.
be so hard.
No, you're honestly, we went into survival mode. That's really what it felt like.
Mm,
And even when she came out within her like all-consuming depression, it still felt like survival mode. Like I would, we're not thinking about like, it's
date
not
night
fair
and
if you're not doing the cooking and you're not helping with the cleaning. Like we just didn't even have time to think about that stuff. It
yeah.
was more just like, how do we get through this moment? And
Mm,
so our relationship was, I mean, I don't even know how I would define it. It certainly didn't feel like the marriage as we had known it. It just felt like Julia was in a really, really difficult place. She needed support. She needed kindness and patience. And so I tried to give that to her as she got through the support, like the tough phase. And then once she did, it was like, okay, can we get back to now actually experiencing a marriage again? You know?
yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate that? Because I'm assuming like there's Google, but like people don't typically write about these kind of things from a marriage standpoint as of like how do you rebuild and how do you get back to normal life and how do you pursue each other? So how did you guys like move forward in that?
Yeah. So first off, you hit on a good point, which is like there really isn't much out there that addresses this issue. And it's a big reason why I wanted to write this book because I not only felt alone because I couldn't check in with my spouse because she was the one who was so sick, but I felt alone because I couldn't find a community of people who had gone through something like I had. Like I honestly felt like I was the first partner to ever go through this, which is obviously not the case. And so really one of the big goals of the book is to try to just be a voice out there so that if someone's going through something similar, they don't feel so alone. I mean, their path is going to be unique to them and not follow the same structure that Giulia and I have taken. But if not, I cannot tell you how much it would have meant to me if I could have sat down and talked to someone or read a book from someone who had gone through this, just because it felt so lonely. Now, as far as like, what did we do as a result? We botched it badly for a while. Like we were just like feeling around in the dark. And like the first real issue was when she got better, she was like, I just had the worst year of my life. I want to have fun now. Like, I don't care. Let's just do it and have a great time. And I'm like, my experience was I just had the worst year of my life. And I couldn't talk to you about it. Like I had to pretend it wasn't.
Yeah.
I actually now need to get all of this off my chest and process it with you. And that was really like, we fought a lot about that. Giulia didn't really want anything to do with it. And at the time I felt really like wounded by that. I was like, how are you not here for me when I was there for you? But now like with the benefit of hindsight, I get it. Like she was so fatigued by the effort she had to put into her recovery. The last thing you want to do then is go and have to try to take care of someone else,
Yeah. Or rehash it all.
Or
With
exactly,
somebody else.
rehash it all. So honestly, the book became like the writing. I really wrote the book for Giulia because we tried couples therapy. It wasn't that great. It also felt like a lot of money. We weren't getting anywhere.
Yeah.
We tried to talk about it, but we're never really in the same space. So during her illness, I had been writing these really long emails to her parents and my parents to just kind of explain what was going on. So I actually started to write to her like, hey, let me just give you a sense of what this was like for me, because it's so important for me to feel like you see me, that you see what it was for me. Like that kind of sense of acknowledgement and validation felt really crucial for me to be able to like move beyond this. And it turned out to do exactly that. Like I would basically go and write and email her what I had worked on, and then she would read it and then we'd talk about it. And she got a whole different point of view of her illness, and she got to see what it was like for me. And I think that played a huge role in bringing us closer after this, and that was just kind of something we did because I felt like I really needed to be heard,
Yeah. 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 And that was one of the questions, or actually you kind of touched on two questions that I had, which was what is like the one thing you want readers to walk away from after reading your book? And then I was also curious about like some of the specific hindsights that you have now after experiencing three different episodes.
Well, to address the first one about readers, each reader is going to come to this book with their own path. And
Yeah.
I think that there is definitely a specific kind of reader that I'm hoping can find this, which is someone who's in my shoes.
Right.
And if that's the case, I just hope they feel less alone. But I think the more universal thing that I'm hoping to share with readers is all of us are in relationships with each other, right? And maybe you're in a long-term relationship with a husband or wife or spouse or whatever. Maybe you live with siblings or parents or whoever you're in relationship with. Relationships are tested by crisis. That's just what happens. Someone gets sick or something goes wrong with the job or there's money issues or anything like that. And I think that Giulia and I really had to learn that the best way to navigate a crisis and still maintain that relationship was to be honest with each other and to be kind with each other. If we could do those two things, then we could potentially navigate crises in the future without them being so disruptive. And so I think that this book, like the biggest takeaway I hope is that anyone who's in a relationship, and again, I don't just mean romantic relationship, but it certainly most fittingly applies to that. But anyone who's in that can just be maybe a little bit more, I don't know if the right word's empowered or less afraid that if things go wrong, if there's uncontrollable circumstances that face you, you and your partner can still make it through as long as you continue to both see each other as a team and treat each other as teammates. Then I think that people really are capable of getting through some pretty serious storms. As far as the question of things that I've learned looking back, I think I've learned what listening is. I think I sort of thought I knew what listening is, but realized that for me, listening is if someone has a problem, I hear it and then I try to brainstorm solutions, but that's not actually listening. That's doing, And listening, which maybe could feel really passive, is actually like a huge gift to someone. I also think that I learned the importance of self-care. I have always been a really upbeat kind of guy, and I never really had to work to be happy. It just kind of came to me. And so when Giulia got sick and I was constantly feeling worried and sad, I realized I wasn't at my best in order to be able to help her. And I've since grown to appreciate how much of an effort and pursuit it is to be happy and balanced, and that it's one of the most important pursuits we can take, that like, I think people tend to glorify working hard and being busy and ambitious. And I think those are good things, but I think that a more important thing is to work for feeling a sense of inner peace and acceptance and joy, so that when life throws you curveballs, you're able to be there and be able to be in it and not be afraid, And so, that's something that I really, really have been reflecting on a lot. And I continue now. I mean, Giulia hasn't been hospitalized in 2.5 years, but I literally, like on my Outlook calendar, I go and make appointments with myself, where no one's allowed to, I'm busy at that time because I'm by myself and I'm spending time. For me, like, it's a lot about being active and exercising. So I'm maybe going on a run or something like that.
Yeah, that's something that we talk a lot about with other women on this podcast, is kind of making that time for that self-care, and that it's more than just like that glorified word self-care that gets thrown around about, like, and what comes to mind for most people is like going to the spa or like doing something big and elaborate, but really it's about like mental wellness and taking care of your mind and your space. And so that way, like whether like you, if you're a father, a husband, or like for most of us, a wife, a mother, like that when the stress and the like the crisis does come, like you have that extra kind of give in yourself to use from.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm glad to hear this is something you talk about with your guests a lot, because it's like, I feel like the expectations on parents is to be so uh, sacrificial and like
Yeah.
almost martyr your sense of self at the altar of your children, you know?
Right.
And to me, that's like ridiculous, you know, because if you set up this impossible standard that no one can live up to, and you're just going to feel bad about it because you don't. And instead, you know, and this is something that I think people who parent together have to work on together. But it's like Julie and I have really learned that, like, I'm not going to guilt her if she wants to go for a run instead of be around the house with us, because that run is good for her. If she wants to go to yoga or wants to go to a flea market with friends, like that's stuff that's good and that feeds her soul and that's important. So then when she's home, she's not consumed with the anxiety and pressures of parenting. Instead, she's able to say, you know what, I had my me time. Now I'm so excited to be with my family. But I do think the challenge is a balance, right? Like I can't say, hey, Julia, I need to go surfing, but I want to go to a surf spot that's 3 hours away. So I'll be back, you know, I'm going to leave at dawn and be back tomorrow evening because I may as well just sleep out since I'm driving so far. I can't do that every weekend, you know?
Yeah.
You have to make the accommodations for what fits in your lifestyle. But I just think there's a lot of guilt that gets attached to it. Like, oh, I'm not there, you know, helping out or being with my kids. And I don't know, that's such a bummer that people feel that guilt, you know? And I get it. Like I felt that guilt too about caring for Julia, but I've let that guilt go because I just know, like, yeah, I could be at the house 24/7 with my son, but I'm going to get pretty darn cranky if that's the case. And then I'm not actually being a good dad. Yeah, I'm in the room with him, but I'm not being the kind of dad that I want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing in exercising self-care is that it helps you to be that best person of yourself that you can be.
Sure, absolutely.
So let me ask you this: when you were younger, did your parents influence you in your marriage, in that when there was crisis, your first instinct wasn't to like run or you know, like take the back seat, or like how I mean, because culture today, it's like, you know, it's like if it gets tough, you just like find somebody else, you know, like
Right.
marriage isn't for a lot of people what it used to be.
Right.
And unfortunately, you know, people just don't stick together through the hard times as much as we probably should. So what influenced you, or what kept you in that state of mind of like, I'm here and I will always be here?
Well, yeah, there's no question about it that my parents were role models for a healthy marriage for me. You know, they just are a great team. They were throughout my whole childhood and continue to be, and did a really good job of, like, if something got bad, they would talk sort of amongst themselves first so that they could present to us a real united front so that we couldn't really try to play mom and dad off each other, you know?
Yeah.
But also just like unquestioned sense of commitment. And Julia's parents were the same. I mean, it's funny, both my parents and her parents met really young, like in their late teens, just like Julia and I did, and have been together for decades, just like Julia and I aspire to. And so I think we both just came from these models where it's like family is family, you know? And when she got sick, I didn't even really think about it because I'd been with Julia for 9 years. And so like she really was my vision of what family was. And so I wouldn't leave my sister if she wasn't feeling well. So I'm not going to choose the family member that I actually got to choose. Like I actually got to pick Julia as my family. So it honestly like didn't really come up during the time of crisis.
That's awesome. Because many people, like a lot of us, like I know my husband and I, we both have parents who have been separated.
Yeah.
And so when we got married, we had no idea what like a functional marriage looked like. So it was a Yeah, it was a fun time.
Yeah, you had to define it for yourselves. We're really fortunate that we had these role models to who we were raised by that we could sort of model after. But I think also still everyone's got to define their own marriage for themselves anyway. Like even though Julia and I had these role models, we still had to define what our marriage was going to look like, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I definitely think people don't go into relationships anticipating just how much work they are. It's just like the self-care. Your relationship needs self-care, you know? My
Yeah.
analogy is always it's like a garden. And I actually got this from a therapist that I saw. Like, if you don't tend that garden, it's going to get overrun with weeds. Or if you don't water it, it's all going to shrivel up and die. And like a lot of people, I think, take their relationships for granted. They just think, oh, I work hard in my career. I work hard to be the best parent that I can. But my marriage, whatever, it's like, that'll be fine. We'll just figure that out, you know? And for whatever reason, we put some of the least amount of effort into it because everything else feels so busy and consuming. And so I think it's this whole illness actually really helped Julia and I center ourselves that we really do need to continually prioritize our marriage because then that becomes sort of the center of our family so that we're in a good state together. We can be good parents. We can project good parenting to our son. We can go into our careers not feeling uncertain about things, yada, yada, yada. It just feels like it's such a worthwhile investment of time.
Yeah. Well, and then Jonas came into the picture, and so how did that change from like caring for just Julia and then now having also Jonas, like how did you guys decide together how to move forward if another episode was to happen, or how did you also balance like being a father now and then also a caregiver and or husband at the time?
So yeah, Jonas, I think like a lot of parents would say is like the greatest gift we've ever gotten in our life. But when he was born, everything was great. And it wasn't until
Yeah.
Julia had her relapse that I remember sitting there in the ER with Jonas in the car seat, in the stroller, and the doctor saying to me, I'm like, you don't get it, I've done this before. Like Julia's already been sick like this before. I know what I'm doing. And she goes, you have no idea what you're doing because now you have a 5-month-old. So you actually haven't done this before. This is so different. And it really was because what Jonas needed was unconditional love that sort of showed the world to be a beautiful and comforting and safe place. And what Giulia needed was unconditional love, but more a space to be able to express some of her dark feelings and concerns and worries and without judgment. And to kind of be able to get to move at the pace she needed to. And so like when she was in the hospital, it was just kind of a logistical pain in the neck because the hospital was an hour away and I had Jonas on the hand and I didn't want to bring him to the hospital all the time. And so my mother-in-law came out and yada, yada, yada. But it was actually more challenging when we were all in the home together because Julia and Jonas were in such different spaces, like Jonas he's this little baby. It's just like everything's cool and new and he wants to like giggle about it all and just like explore. And Julia is just like wants to die and doesn't like the world that we're in and thinks it's not worth staying alive. And so trying to be there for both of them was really, really hard. And to be honest, I think I ended up choosing to be there for Jonas more, like he was just a baby. And Julia was a grown up. And I didn't know this. I didn't know that when you become a parent, at some point, you might have to prioritize. You might have to make a choice over who you need to focus on more, your child or your spouse, And that's such a hard position to be in because you love them both in such different ways. And I actually I think by being a dad, I was like all hands on deck, micromanager to the extreme for Julia's first episode. And I think I've stepped back a lot more. And even the third episode, I was like the most step back. I was just like, accepted that I didn't have a ton of potential to be able to do stuff, that this really has to be in the hands of the professionals. And B, that I just couldn't be as available to Giulia because I needed to be available to Jonas. So that was hard. It was really those. I keep saying this is how tough this was, because it was, but like, I think that some of the lessons Giulia and I have learned about openness and kindness is something that we really try to focus on with Jonas. Like, we try to, in terms that he can understand, be open with him about the world. Mm-hmm. He knows that mom gets sick and has been sick a few times, and we've got this book about it. And we haven't gone into the details, but we will, because at some point we want to make sure that his experience of this, he feels like his voice is heard. In the same way it was so important for my voice to be heard after that first episode, I know that if Giulia has any relapses, she's going to need that voice to be heard as well. I'm sorry, he's going to need that voice to be heard as well.
Yeah.
So it's really just about trying to be, open and let him tell us what he wants, and we try to support that, and not just us saying, well, we know what's best for you. We're your parents and we say so that's why it is this way,
Yeah. Was that a book that you guys created for Jonas, or was that a book that you found for him?
The book about the Giulia?
Yeah. Oh, it was okay. So it was like a personal. I didn't know if it was like one of those that talks about, somebody, in the or whatever, in a roundabout way to explain to kids.
Referring to the book that I've written, My Lovely Wife.
Oh, okay.
And because I've had to be away and travel for it and write. Mm-hmm. So Jonas gets that it's the book project, right? And that it's about family, and it's about how mom can sometimes feel sick. But I have heard that there's a couple of great resources for kids. I haven't read them yet. There's one, I think it's about it's like a bear family, and it's about bipolar in a family, and it's in ways that kids can relate to. And I think that's something we'll get to. But since Jonas, again, it's been 2.5 years, I don't even know if he really remembers the second episode. I mean, it was only 5 months. And third episode, when he was 2.5, I don't know how much he remembers from it. And so I don't necessarily want to dig up too much now, in case, in the hopes that we don't have another relapse. Then we'll sort of be able to process it as something from the past. But of course, if Giulia does have a relapse and we have to deal with it in the immediate moment, I know that we'll just constantly be trying to adapt around meeting Jonas where he is with it.
Yeah. So I would have loved to ask Giulia some woman questions, but but it's okay. But how do you feel like that, as best as you can for her, how do you think that it has affected her in becoming a mom and also going through being bipolar?
Yeah, so when Giulia, and I want to say how cautious I am to speak on Giulia's behalf, but when she was first hospitalized, she said to her mom, I don't ever get to be a mom now. I'm crazy and I don't get to be a mom. And so, she said that to me with tears in her eyes. It was just such a hard thing, because I think we both have wanted to be parents for so long. Yeah. And I know that when we did have the opportunity to get pregnant and then got pregnant, it was the happiest I've ever seen her. I mean, she was so in love with herself when she was pregnant. And so I know that motherhood is so crucial to her. And I don't know, how her diagnosis impacts it. I think from someone looking in on it, I think that it's made her more self-aware of how she is as a mom and how she wants to be, as compared to maybe just acting more on instinct. This is the interesting thing about times of crisis is they force reflection, right? And they force you to learn more about yourself. And then you try to take that self-awareness into the more normal day-to-day stuff. And so I think that Giulia's hospitalizations have made her so much more aware of who she is. And I think that ultimately, they've made her a better mom as a result, just because she's more in tune with herself and what she can give to our son.
Since all this stuff has happened, I mean, you've written an awesome book. Have you guys been able to find that community that you were kind of missing out on,
Well,
like
you know,
before all this?
it's really interesting. We've certainly along the way found friends who we know are kind of on the inside. They've gone through certain things, and they're people we can turn to. Um, the reality is, though, is we don't want to just have mental illness be the defining aspect of every minute of our life.
Right.
And so right now we're talking about it a lot because we're trying to do book promotion and we're doing different interviews and stuff like that. But to be honest with you, it's nice to just have a community of people who we can just be parents or adults with, as compared to always be focused on mental health. But there's no question about it that I feel like the loneliness piece has become so much better because we have found people through various ways who we can, if things get bad, who we can turn to. And that's really been amazing,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, that's something that I've learned in becoming a mom, and that my husband and I have learned, growing up and as our marriage is evolving and growing, is that it's really about finding like a small group of people, like your core group, and that's not easy to do because you don't want everybody to be like the same as you, because then you can't really like grow, and it just feels like a club instead of like people, encouraging each other and like kind of learning from each other in different ways. And, like it's more organic, I guess, if you're just people who like to be around each other because you think each other are cool and you kind of have the same things that you like, and that everybody just kind of like accepts the quirks and the mess and the stuff that everybody just comes to the group with. And that is like super hard to find.
I agree. And especially when you throw not just quirks, but like a major mental illness diagnosis in the mix, right? Mm-hmm. But thankfully, I'm actually one of four, and I get along with all my siblings and all of our spouses. Like the 8 of us are really close friends. And so I've kind of got this built-in community there. Unfortunately, we're really spread out geographically, but 2 years ago, my sister moved to the Bay Area, and it's the first time we've had family live nearby in 8 years, which has been so awesome because now we get to see each other all the time, and our kids are getting to know each other really well. But yeah, forming a community, it's something we have kind of lost. Everyone gets these houses and they kind of go retreat into their houses and put up walls between their neighbors and don't necessarily count on each other the way that we did maybe hundreds of years ago, and certainly like thousands of years ago when we were living in literally little packs of groups of people or tribes or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's just, I think that's something that we've really lost as a modern society, is this, with so much emphasis on individualization, that idea of a village has become underemphasized.
Yeah, and that's kind of something that I am hoping comes out of this kind of thing that I am creating or trying to create, is that it gives women, like, eventually I hope to create an event where like I have a Facebook group where it's like the Today's Eden Tribe, where all the women could come in and like we talk about this stuff, and it's like a no judgment zone, and I put it all out there, and I let people put it all out there, and so between the podcast and then the Facebook group, and then hopefully an event one day, is to where I'm like, I tell my husband all the time, I'm like, the main thing that I want to get from this is for people to actually make friends with each other, to meet each other, to like turn friendships from online to in person, and then to have a day for like women to be filled up within, like with learning or with self-care or whatever it is that day will be like, and then the next day to have like all the family come, like the husbands awesome. And the kids.
Yeah, that sounds really awesome.
Yes, I mean, hopefully one day that'll be able to happen, but I mean, that's the whole purpose, is because it's so hard to find those groups. Yep. And then but I wanted to ask you some more questions of like, okay, so how can we and I always call it this word with something I haven't experienced myself, but like as an outsider, how do we support a loved one with high anxiety, and like what are some things that we don't do?
You don't say, just relax. It's going to be okay. Don't worry about it, which I did at the
Oh,
beginning for sure. Can't you you can't sleep. Just relax. Just go to sleep. It's going to be fine. I think that what the biggest thing you can do is just be available. Be available. Be present when you're with the person. Um, Let them kind of lead. There's some times where either when Julia wasn't doing well or when I was in the caregiving mode, like especially for me in the caregiving mode, like a lot of people would want to come up and they would be like, "Hey, so how's Julia doing? How's Julia doing?" And everyone was always asking me for updates on how Julia was doing. Got to the point where I was like, I can't give you an update because I'm so over it. It's literally all I spend all day thinking about.
yeah.
And I just need to do something different than update you on how Julia's doing. So I think similarly, if someone's dealing with anxiety or depression, it's so consuming. So if you ask them, so how's the depression? How are you feeling? How's this going? Sometimes you just need to let a person like not have to focus on that thing for a while, if possible. But if you catch them at a time when they do need to focus, then you got to be there for that too. So it's kind of going in without a set agenda beyond just being with them and being there for them, and letting that really is to me the greatest gift you can give to someone who's struggling, is that they know that you're there, and they know that you're going to listen to them, whichever direction you might need to go in.
What kind of support from friends would that be the same kind of support that you would want from like friends or other people doing for just you as well? Just kind of like listening and talking, asking you questions about real life, anything other than.
Well, yeah, I mean, like for example, there was this one, I talk about this in the book, but like the first time I left Julia alone during the first episode, it was about 2 months into things. I went surfing with a friend, and when I came home, she had taken a fistful of pills and put it in her mouth and then spit it out, and then took another fistful and put them in her mouth and then spit them out again. So it's like, I'm not sure if those are genuine suicide attempts or not, but they were pretty darn close. So the next morning, I went with Julia to her outpatient program. We explained what was going on. I was in that meeting for like an hour and a half, but it's a 3-hour program, so there was still an hour and a half left. So I called my friend who lived around the corner, and I went over to his house, and I sort of told him why I had time to kill, and he just handed me a guitar, and he and I both play guitar, and we just ended up playing guitar together for like an hour. And that was the best thing that happened, because it was just something different, and I didn't have to. I'd already been obsessing about this for so long. I didn't have to go and re-explain it all. I could just sort of like have a breather, And so I don't know. That friend of mine acted on really good intuition. But then there's been other moments where I really needed advice, and friends were able to jump in. So I don't know. It's really hard. Like, this is the part of the story that I'm not actually as aware of, is like, what is maybe sort of the non-central characters, but the supporting characters? How can they help out? And to be honest with you, I kind of have tunnel vision and don't really know what that experience is like for them. All I know is like when it's all consuming for me and Julia, and that it's hard for my family members and friends to know the right thing, and I'm not quite sure what it is,
Yeah. I mean, just I feel like a good assumption might be that, when you ask to talk about it, that's when you want to talk about it, or when you're like, hey, I need to talk. But otherwise, it's probably a good guess that you don't want to talk. And I feel like your friend was awesome in knowing or he did the better thing than what most people tend to do when they feel like they have to kind of say something, is that like they end up saying, well, I don't know what you're experiencing, but this was sort of like that. And you're just like, no, you like, don't even compare that to where it was like, he was like, I have no words, but we can jam. Like,
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's right. I think it's like, if you're a friend and you have a friend, another friend who's going through something tough, you might have your curiosity about what's going on, and you can let them know you're available, but let the person who's in the experience drive how much they talk about it and how much they share. And for you, otherwise, just be the friend who maybe they can have fun with because they need that fun release.
yeah. So, what are some signs, do you think, or things that we should look for or do if we feel like something is going on? Or what are some signs that you wish you had took seriously that maybe the first time around you didn't realize was actually a serious situation that maybe others you can share so that others can maybe be aware of those things?
I don't know if it's necessarily signs because it was kind of clear something was going on. I think it's
Mm.
more not having shame to ask for help. Like I know for a fact Julia was slow to go to a therapist. She was definitely slow to go to a psychiatrist. And when the psychiatrist, this was before the hospital, when they gave her medication, we both were like, that's ridiculous. Like Julia's not someone who needs medication. She's not depressed. What are they even thinking,
Yeah.
because we had this judgment around what it means to take medicine for your mood or for your mental health. And so I think honestly, the biggest thing that people can do is not feel ashamed to ask for help. Asking for help is actually a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So before we go on, I have three like what would it be questions to end out this conversation with you. But I just want to acknowledge you and Giulia and your guys' family for sharing this awesome story. When I found your book, by the title, I was like, I don't know what I'm about to read.
Yeah, right.
But then, you flip it over and you're just like, I like reading books where it gives me insight into people and in situations that I haven't been in, so that way I can be a better friend or, just, a better person. I feel like, because if you don't know other things that you haven't experienced, I feel like you're kind of missing out.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm just so grateful for you guys to write it and listening to other interviews with you guys, especially with Giulia.
And I'm so
Man,
can't be
yeah,
today. She's a career woman, and so scheduling can actually be pretty difficult sometimes. I
yeah,
still
no,
appreciate you wanting to have me on because I know this is primarily a podcast for women, and so having a male author is I appreciate it. It's nice to connect.
yeah, you're the first male guest on my, so yay.
Yeah, cool. That's
but but yeah, just hearing you guys talk on I was listening to a podcast last night, and it was a mental wellness one. I don't remember the title, but it was so good. And most of the time, I remember thinking like how brave and awesome Giulia is to talk about her story, to let you share it with others, with the world, to let it be more than her. Like we can get so caught up in worrying about what others think, and I feel like there's probably still some of that, but at the same time, sharing your story so that it can do more for others. And I feel like that's a very selfless thing to do and a very brave thing to do, and something that I think Jonas will be very proud of. And I can't speak that for him, but I'm just assuming that, like, I would think that my mom would be kick-ass if she, shared her story like that. And so, yeah, awesome for you guys. I'm excited to see what your book does and how many doors it opens for people and how many relationships it helps heal for people, and just the wonderful things that it's going to do.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. And I just want to echo, I think that I literally each day gain deeper appreciation for how much courage Giulia has. There's the first courage to even survive her diagnosis and make it through 3 hospitalizations, but then the exponential courage of being so open. For me, I wrote it, and I'm not the one. This isn't really about my health. This is about hers. And so it's a safer position for me to be in than her, And the fact that she wants to be out there because she wants to help address the stigma of mental health. She wants to be a voice that people who can give people hope around diagnoses, and I just think that's so amazing. This especially hits me. We've done a few book readings, and in the book readings we do a Q&A together, and like that's this whole thing has. I've never seen Giulia so empowered before, and it's really incredible to see. Because let's not forget, right? Like this woman has contemplated suicide, and so to go from a point of that kind of hopelessness to instead feeling so, being so brave and aware of how brave she is and proud of how brave she is. It's really remarkable.
Yeah. And those are a lot of things that actually a lot of women, I mean, and in different ways, in different degrees, we have a lot of thoughts that we're afraid to share, whether it's through anxiety, postpartum depression, post-stress, all those PTSD, all those things. And for her to put those thoughts out there, for us to be like, thank you for, for sharing those, and that, so we don't have to feel like we're the only ones, and they're different in different degrees, but we all have issues, and that's okay.
Right on. Yeah, I agree with you.
So I wanted to ask you those 3 questions, and the first one being, if you could choose a book that has been the most influential, what would it be?
It's a tough question. Am I allowed to cheat and give you 2 answers?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so the book that's been most influential around my passion for reading and writing is Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I've read it twice, and it's over 1,000 pages, and I can't wait to read it a 3rd time.
Oh my gosh.
Just an amazing book. I would say book that's influential as far as how I view mental illness and how it shaped my ability to support Giulia. It's a book called The Noonday Demon by Andrew Solomon, and it's all about depression. And I learned so much through that book that to this day informs how I view mental illness and approach Giulia's in particular.
That's awesome. And I hope people check out that book, because sometimes those books are hard to find.
Yeah.
Okay, and then my next question is, this is normally a woman's podcast, so you're just going to have to give me your best shot at this one. But if you could empower women in one way, what would it be? This is interesting. I worry about being a man saying how to empower women, right? Yeah.
I would let women answer that question themselves. I guess what I would do is I would be a man who wants to listen and not pretend that I know what a woman wants, and not pretend that I know what's best for women and what the experience of motherhood is, or being a career woman, or any of those. I don't know. I certainly am interested, and I certainly want to support, but I guess the best thing that I could do to empower women is shut up and listen.
And all the women said amen.
Yeah.
If you could tell your younger self one thing, assuming that he would listen, what would you say?
Like, how young are we talking here?
I mean, wherever you want to go. Like, what's the thing that comes to mind the most that you needed to know, whether it was a year ago, like a week ago, 5 years ago?
I don't know. I actually instinctively went, because I work with high school kids, I instinctively went to my high school self.
Uh-huh.
And I would say that in high school, I kind of was actually, I didn't learn until I got to college a better sense of perspective on what matters and doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And I think I actually was pretty uptight and worried in high school. And so I think I would tell myself some lessons around, these are the things that really matter in life. Family, being with the people that you're with, focusing on the thing that's right in front of you. These are the things that don't matter. Your grades, your SAT scores, your future salary, like those things don't matter. So stop putting so much focus on them. Thankfully, I do think I came to that realization before I graduated college, because I probably otherwise would have gone to law school and been a pretty unhappy lawyer. But instead, I'm like a very happy teacher and writer, you know?
So what do you tell? So now I'm curious because you're a teacher and you're saying you said those things. So now I'm like, what do you tell your students?
Oh, I
then?
tell them the exact same thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I work with ninth graders, so I have the benefit that grades actually don't matter as much as when they're juniors or seniors. But like, I say all the time, like, this is not a means to an end. This is the end itself. Let's be here. We got this amazing year together. Let's make the most of it. I try to design my classes where if you put effort and thought into things, you generally do pretty well in my class. I think there's a lot of different versions of what good work looks like. And so I try to reward that as best I can so that it doesn't feel like school is this like grade mania, you know, because we certainly have that culture going strong in this country.
Yeah.
It's a little scary, you know?
Definitely. And that's a whole nother topic.
Topic.
But thank you so much for taking the time out from your family and from everything and for being on and talking about your book. And yeah, so thank you so much.
You're welcome. I really appreciate it. And especially the distinction of being the first solo male on the show. I appreciate it. I'm a strong, self-defined feminist. And so I'm stoked that I could be on the show.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that episode. If you could, it would mean the world to me for you to shoot over to iTunes really quickly and leave a rating or a review for the Today's Eden podcast. Also, you should definitely check out Mark Lukács's book, My Lovely Wife in the Psych Ward. There is so many more details in his book that he hasn't shared in any of his interviews, and it is so good. I'm reading it right now. If you want to get a free copy of it, you can go to audibletrial.com/today'seden and get it for free there if you're signing up for the first time for Audible. Also want to make sure that you guys are checking out the Today's Eden Tribe Facebook group. You can go to today'seden.com. and go to the top menu bar, click Today's Eden Tribe, and there you can join our Facebook group where we kind of hang out and talk about real stuff just like we do on here, but with each other. Also, if you want to check out the show notes, I have all the links to follow Mark and his family, Giulia and Jonas, on his show notes page at today'seden.com/podcasts/022. And the quote I want to share with you today, and oh my gosh, I love this quote, is, "In Japan, broken objects are often repaired with gold. The flaw is seen as a unique piece of the object's history, which adds to its beauty. Consider this when you feel broken."